hear about cell phones and health, I think the issue is one that we all find a little perplexing. After all, when I first heard that there might be something wrong with cell phones and health, about maybe 9.5 years ago, I didn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it, and I owned 3 phones. And I was one of those people, that walked around kind of like a gunslinger. I had 2 of them. Actually, I had 3. Don't ask me why. I was directing a program then of a couple dozen scientists, and I was pretty obnoxious. I wanted everybody to be able to answer me right away and had people be wired in through the wireless radio frequency radiation. So when I first looked into the problem and I heard there could be an issue, I dismissed it entirely. After all, I said, if there was a problem, I'd know about it. You see, I'm a scientist, and I worked at the U.S. National Academy of Sciences with the best scientists in the world, and I did. And I figured if there was really a problem, I would have heard about it. I worked for President Clinton, and I was a political appointee. So I remembered that we set up some kind of study at the time, and I learned later, as I document in my book, that that study was a bit of a sham, all $27 million of it, and that we really had very little research on cell phone safety. So I'm going to talk with you today about what I know, and the organization of my talk is very straightforward. First, I'm going to talk about what is cell phone radiation. After all, most people do not realize that a cell phone is a two-way microwave radio. Radio frequency energy is the term the cell phone industry likes to use to describe what comes out of a cell phone. But there's another phrase that describes it just as well, and that is microwave radiation. A cell phone is a two-way microwave radio. It poses special risks to children and to one of our most important organs, our brain. I'm going to review the evidence on health impacts, and I'm going to review evidence on effects on sperm, prenatal damage, effects on brain structure and function, breast cancer, increased case series risks, and head and brain tumors. Now, that's a lot to cover, and I hope you'll bear with me. I will say from the outset, Environmental Health Trust, which is the nonprofit that I've set up to try to promote understanding of this, has a website which is a work in progress. We're always looking for advice about how to improve it, but it does contain an excellent compendium of the science on this issue, and I would urge you to take a look at our website, which I'll leave you the address of at the end. And finally, I will provide you expert advice coming from experts that work for Environmental Health Trust, who include some of the top scientists in the world today from Israel, from Brazil, France, the United States, about how to protect yourself and your family. And you'll find at the table out front this little pamphlet which provides a consensus of what we know, why we need to be concerned with respect to effects on the brain and sperm, and simple things you can do to protect yourself and your family. Of course, you should not text and drive. That's important. But most people do not realize that if they're in a car with a phone next to their head and the car radio is not running through the car antenna in the roof, your head becomes the antenna. And each time you're moving from one cell signal to another, the phone is programmed to go to max power so you don't drop a call. Let's talk about what radiation really is. The electromagnetic spectrum runs all the way from the things that power the electricity in this room to those that you cannot see, the gamma rays, X-rays, and the like, which we clearly understand are ionizing and damaging. Ionizing meaning that they can break the DNA bonds that hold everything together in all living material. Here's where light that we can see falls, and here's where microwave radiation falls, right in this spectrum. And microwave radiation is the radiation that can damage us not by breaking DNA bonds and not by its weak power, because it is weak. And that's what I thought when I dismissed this totally. Microwave radiation in an oven uses 2.4 billion cycles a second at 1,000 watts of power to cook a cup of water in 1 minute. Microwave radiation from a cell phone could use up to 2.4 billion cycles a second at less than 1 watt of power. And I believed, as many scientists still do today, that because the power was so weak, the fact that the signal was the same frequency meant it had no biological effect. That belief, it's like a religious conviction among some physicists, is in fact not correct, and I'm going to explain to you why. Cell phones emit pulsed microwave radiation. It's the pulsed nature of the signal that is problematic. It has nothing to do with the power. The erratic, pulsed nature of the signal from a cell phone that allows it to go up and down and give you information may be why it's so problematic biologically. Here's an illustration of what that pulse signal looks like. The signal has frequency, remember, between actually 800 million to 2.4 billion cycles a second. It has amplitude, it has a wavelength, and it can have information content. And the complexity of the signal is quite important to its biological effect. I will later explain to you that one of the theories, and it is a theory, of why cell phone radiation can be so damaging is that it interferes with calcium efflux. Calcium is one of the most essential things we have in any living system. And the ability of cell phone radiation to interfere with calcium may be why different forms of cell phone-like radiation are being used today to treat people with cancer by enhancing the uptake of chemotherapy through something called electroporation. Now, I'm not going to get into the details of that. Perhaps we'll have time for some discussion. But understand that the biological effect of cell phone-like radiation is really not debated by those few scientists who understand its exquisite ability to affect cells at the level of the divalent calcium ion. Now, I'm going to take questions at the end. All right? Unless you can't hear me. Thank you. Because I have quite a lot of material I want to get through. And what I want to show you right now is this 4-second phone call. During a 4-second phone call, look at the change in what we call power density. That's measured as volts per meter. Meter being an area, volts being a measure, again, of power. Volts per meter varies a great deal in 4 seconds. You will see that the worst time to hold a phone right next to your head is when you immediately answer it. When you first answer it, it goes to max power. That's why I use something like this. And the advantage of this is that I can actually hear. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm of a certain age where hearing is not something you take for granted any longer. And I don't think most people can hear very well with these devices. And I will ask you now, how many of you have an iPhone with you? Oh, well, how many of you have your iPhones on airplane mode? Okay, I would encourage the rest of you to put it on airplane mode because then you're not transmitting. But even so, would you please, those of you who have iPhones, please take them out and go to settings and give me a signal with your hand when you've done that because I'm going to show you something rather interesting that you might not be aware of. While you're doing that, I'll take a moment to tell you one thing you may also not be aware of, which is that cell phone standards were set in 1997. When the average call took less than 6 minutes, it employed the head of a 220-pound male, and they were set to avoid heating, presumably the brain. And I document in my book, Disconnect, the actual studies were done, I'm not making this up, on rats that had been deprived of food and trained to run a maze in order to get food. And they put thermometers in the rectums of the rats, and they determined how hot the rat had to get to be hungry and not try to get food. And based on that, they extrapolated to human effects. Now, if you're already at your cell phone, go to Settings. And go to General. It doesn't matter. Airplane mode off is fine and preferable. Go to General first, and then go to About, which is for many of you at the top of the screen. Right? And then go all the way down, after you've clicked on About, all the way down to the word Legal, which you never knew was there. And then click on that, and click on RF Exposure. And you will see there written very clearly the advice. To reduce RF exposure, use a hands-free option such as that provided with the phone. And if you keep the phone close to the body, you can exceed the as-tested exposure limits, which means, gentlemen, do not keep a cell phone in your pocket when it's turned on, except on airplane mode. When it's turned off, you can do whatever you want. In airplane mode, you can do whatever you want. But the reality is, there's a warning inside that phone, right? How many of you have seen it before? Well, I think that makes a very interesting point, does it not? So the standards have not been changed for 17 years. Yesterday in San Francisco, Tom Wheeler, who is now the head of the Federal Communications Commission, had a very rude experience at the Commonwealth Club where several people interrupted his talk to ask him what he was going to do about cell phone standards, because he's the head of the FCC now, appointed by President Obama. But you see, for 10 years, he was the head of the Cell Phone Industry Association when they did the $27 million study that found nothing. Now, cell phone standards, as I said, were developed to avoid heating a heavy-set man, not a young child. And you see here the difference in scale of the child versus the man, the point being that the cell phone radiation reaches a larger proportion of the brain of a child, but also, according to studies conducted by the cell phone industry in France and in Switzerland, children's skull bone absorbs 10 times more radiation than adults. Why is this the case? A child's skull is thinner. The thinner the skull, the greater the radiation. A child's brain contains more fluid. The more fluid in an object, the faster it heats up in the microwave oven or anywhere else. Now, much of the energy from cell phone is absorbed by the brain cells in the frontal or temporal lobes. These are modeling done from our colleagues in Athens, Lucas Margaritis. These are data from Om Gandhi, who worked for years for Motorola. That work with Motorola ended the year he published these data, showing a very simple calculation that a child, a 5-year-old, could absorb twice as much radiation as an adult. These are other data that he published, no longer working for Motorola, showing that the smaller the head, the greater the absorption of radiation. No surprise here, it makes sense. And yet, the size of the head, for which all of the world's 6.5 billion cell phones are set today, is that of a man who was over 6 feet tall and weighing well over 200 pounds. Much larger than the average person in India or the average young child in the world today, many of whom are using cell phones. We measure the distribution of radiation in the brain through something called the specific absorption rate. And these calculations coming from industry that I'm about to show you here show clearly that there's even a difference depending on how you hold the phone. If you hold the phone straight, you get a little different distribution than if you hold it tilted. A tilted exposure can give you a little more exposure. It depends on where the antenna is located. It depends on how you hold the phone. And the radiation also depends on your carrier. And the stronger the signal, the less radiation you get in your brain. The weaker the signal, the harder the phone is working and the more radiation it will put into you. Now, the brain grows rapidly throughout embryonic and early life, and this shows you this very simple sketch of how quickly the brain grows. I'm going to be sharing with you data here from a number of my colleagues. This comes from Hugh Taylor, who is the chairman of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at Yale University. Dr. Taylor's produced a number of important studies here, and I want to show you some of those next. As I go through the data, the most important thing I want to tell you about the developing brain is that a child's brain more than doubles in the first year of life, more than doubles. And the faster something grows, the greater the possibility that damage can take place. Radiation from the phone is absorbed into the head and body because the way phones are designed today, their antennas are either around the perimeter or on the back, and there are several different antennas for data, for internet, for voice, and half of the radiation gets into you if you hold the phone directly next to you because of the design of the antenna is symmetrical. And there's a discussion now in the industry with some of us about whether directional antennas might be better. There are ways to improve the design of phones. Industry holds patents on some of these. Whether they will use them as quickly as they might really depends on you. Why? People have to demand safer phones just as they demanded safer cars and bikes and ski helmets and motorbike helmets. And once you have the information I'm going to share with you today, I think you'll join with us to see that that process moves forward. Now I want to turn to some of the experiments with human sperm, which may explain one of the reasons for that warning that's in your iPhone. Experiments with sperm that I'm going to show you here were produced in the following way. Sperm was taken from healthy men, put into 2 test tubes, sperm from the same man. One test tube got exposed to cell phone radiation. The other test tube did not. It's a very clear study. This one now was done in Australia at their National Center for Research on Male Health, which is led by a Cambridge University andrologist, Sir John Aitken. And what he showed is that the cell phone exposed sperm die 3 times faster than the control sperm that are not exposed. Now, of course, all sperm will die in a test tube after a while. And you can measure motility of sperm, how well they swim. And in terms of motility measurements, they found that, again, the sperm that were the poorest swimmers were those that were exposed to cell phone radiation. And there's a measure of vitality of mitochondria of DNA, which are the engines of the cell. The mitochondria is the engine that gives the cell energy to move in the case of sperm. And mitochondrial DNA of sperm were also damaged 3 times more if they were exposed to cell phone radiation, indicated here and here. So clearly, cell phone radiation damages sperm. And in his Statistics and Medicine textbook, edition 7, Professor Stanton Glantz of the University of California, San Francisco, has concluded, based on the data that he's amassed, that cell phone radiation clearly damages sperm count as well as sperm quality. As many of you don't read a book called Statistics in Medicine, 7th edition, I thought I would summarize it for you. Now, another study was done at the Cleveland Clinic by Ashok Agarwal, a very distinguished expert in the field and the director of the Cleveland Clinic's infertility clinic. He noticed that men coming for treatment of infertility seemed to be wearing, as I used to, a lot of these devices at their hips. And he did a simple cross-sectional survey, and he found that the men who used phones the most, or kept them in their pockets the longest, had the lowest sperm count. This study was published in 2008. In 2008, he was able to see that about 20% of men had kept phones in their pocket 4 hours a day. Now, of course, the numbers are much greater. And by the way, we do not have all of the answers for why sperm count has fallen. Certainly, the information Elizabeth Grossman shared with you this morning is relevant because we know a number of petrochemicals, lipophilic organochlorines, can interfere with sperm count. Those studies had been done in highly exposed workers, for example, pesticide workers. But one of the factors that can affect sperm count clearly is cell phone radiation. Now I want to share with you a series of studies that have been done at Yale, this from Professor Taylor and his team with his postdoc, Tamir Aldad, where they took mice and exposed them to cell phone radiation and watched their behavior of the offspring when they became adults. Now, it's easy to study mice because it takes them only 3 weeks to be reproduced. He was particularly interested in attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, sometimes called ADD, and wondered whether cell phone radiation might have any effect, being aware as an OBGYN of the growing number of pregnant young women who are on their phones a lot. So he looked at the question of fetal brain programming because we know, as I showed you from the earlier slides, how rapidly the brain grows during pregnancy and even in the few years after birth. In fact, we know from studies done in neurotoxicology that lead exposures that take place before age 2 to a young child can have an effect on that child's adult intelligence and behavior. So the question he asked was, is there an effect of cell phone radiation on the developing brain? He set up a study with a silenced cell phone. There was no sound coming out of it. It was simply programmed to give it a cell phone signal using an ordinary phone at the time set up right next to the water bottle of the cage. So the exposures were really not that high, but mice drink a lot all the time. And so the mice were exposed through that route. And what he found was that prenatally exposed mice to radio frequency energy, also known as microwave radiation, created adults with significant behavioral impacts. They had poorer memory, they had more hyperactivity, more anxiety, and they had less fear. Less fear. Inappropriately less fear. Other studies, by the way, that I can't show you today have been done with humans, and they have found that cell phone radiation actually reduces your reaction time. So you get faster with cell phone radiation, but you make more mistakes. So think about that next time you're driving and I'm talking on your phone. Now, the research question asked by my colleagues in Turkey, a similar question, was, is there effect of prenatal exposure of cell phone radiation on the rat? And the title of their study you see here, hippocampal granular cell number in the dentate gyrus. The research question is, does this affect the brain? Translating, does prenatal cell phone exposure reduce the number of cells in the thinking part of the brain? This is where we think. Is there an effect of cell phone radiation with exposure taking place during pregnancy? Now, whether or not you're a histopathologist, and I would ask, is anyone here a histopathologist? These slides you don't need to know anything about to be able to understand how beautiful they are. This is elegant work from my colleague Suleiman Kaplan in Turkey at Samsun University. And it shows clearly that the controls not exposed to cell phone radiation have nice, regular, round cells. Cells are supposed to be organized and coherent in order to function and to tell one another to repair themselves, to die at the right time. Those directions come from organized cells. These are the exposed cells. And you can see here that they have less order and there are fewer of them. Now, these two studies, one from Turkey and one from Yale, and by the way, the Yale study was published in something called Scientific Reports, which is a Nature publication, show that the answer to the question is yes, prenatal cell phone exposure does reduce the number of cells in the thinking part of the brain. And again, here you see this further enlargement of the fewer brain cells and their lack of order after prenatal exposure to the rat brain. Now, another study was looking at whether exposures to adult animals could have an effect. Because after all, the prenatal effect we may explain as it's a vulnerability of the young brain. The faster cells grow, the more vulnerable they are. This is showing that there is an effect, actually, on an adult female rat, and we haven't studied the adult male rat, again showing that there is damage caused in the number of pyramidal cells, a very important part of the hippocampus, exposed to cell phone radiation. That adult cell phone exposure kills brain cells tied to balance and other integrative functions. Now, the effect is not as great, although it is statistically significant. It's a smaller effect. But look, I don't know about you, but I want to hold on to every brain cell I have for as long as I can. And we know we're past our peak. So the fact that it appears to have an effect on the developing brain is particularly disconcerting. And for those of you who've already picked up the pamphlet that's available outside, I want to point out to you this image here, which is not in my talk. The image on page 3 of this pamphlet was developed by Nora Volkoff, who is the director of the National Institute of Drug Abuse of the National Institutes of Health. She is an MD, PhD. She is the developer of PET scanning of the brain and a number of brilliant breakthroughs in imaging of the brain. She's an expert in addiction, and she wanted to know whether or not cell phone radiation had an effect on brain metabolism of glucose, possibly dopamine. Dopamine is the thing that drugs, sex, rock and roll produce. That's why we like it. It looks like cell phone radiation also increases dopamine. It increases glucose metabolism, and in the article which we cite in this pamphlet here, that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association and did not get the attention it deserves, she concluded that cell phone radiation, after 50 minutes of exposure, significantly altered and increased glucose metabolism of the brain. She's not been able to follow up that work. Not that she doesn't want to, but funding is not available. The U.S. government has a massive multi-million-dollar program for brain research, and it's doing no research on this issue, despite the fact that the director of the National Institute of Drug Abuse produced a peer-reviewed publication indicating a significant effect on glucose metabolism in the brain. Some of you may be aware that Alzheimer's has been called diabetes of the brain because people with Alzheimer's have too much glucose on the brain. We do not know whether cell phone radiation may have an effect on Alzheimer's, but it certainly appears a plausible hypothesis that ought to be pursued in a society in which more than half of people over age 85 now have some signs of dementia. What are the mechanisms that could be involved here? First of all, we don't know. Second, we do know this. The younger, faster growing cells are more vulnerable. That I'm going to show you next. Breast cells, spermatocytes, neuronal stem cells, the things that grow fast. They all have thinner membranes and faster transformation rates. So let's just do it like this. Try saying Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Okay, I did it. Just try saying it correctly. Please join me. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Now let's do it again. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. And the faster you go, the greater the chance you'll make a mistake. That's what happens with cells as well. So the faster growing cells, the brain, the sperm, the young breast, the young testis, the greater the chance a mistake will happen. Now, brain cells become insulated as we grow older with fatty sheath called myelin. But myelination is not complete until adulthood, and this could be key to some early effects that we saw from the studies of Professor Taylor and Professor Kaplan. Mary Redmayne is a very creative, recent doctorate from New Zealand at Victoria University, and she presented some of the information I'm going to share with you throughout this talk about how myelination could be so critical to explaining some of the effects that we are seeing. Major differences in myelination occur with age, and you can see from these slices here of the brain that the complexity of the brain is clearly much greater with the adult than the 2-week-old. You know, a 2-week-old newborn cannot focus. They sleep most of the time when they're not eating, and they're really learning to integrate functions. You can see it most clearly in their eyes, or the fact that they can sleep through a rock concert. Their brains really are not fully wired. And even at a year, they're becoming more wired. In adulthood, there's a much greater complexity to the brain, and one of the things is the neurons of the adult are more protected with myelin. Myelination occurs in a specific order. It goes from the back of the basic hind brain stem, and spreads up to this part of the brain, the thinking parts of the brain, only later in life. And in fact, myelination is not fully complete until the mid-20s, more late in males than females. And myelination is thought to confer judgment as well, so that the fact that young men myelinate later than young women is sometimes may explain some of their behavior. The lowest myelin protection exists in the fetus, in babies, in young children, and in the elderly. I'm elderly now. You lose some myelin, that means your vulnerability to your brain is greater as you get older. We don't know how microwave radiation affects the structure of the brain. We don't know how it affects the unmyelinated brain. But the research of Professors Taylor and Kaplan and the research of Dr. Volkoff that has not been able to continue certainly suggests that there are powerful effects on myelin from microwave radiation. Again, we don't know what could be going on, but I want to share this with you, not because I think it's correct, but because it raises a hypothesis. This is cell phone radiation, electromagnetic waves. It may produce reactive oxygen species that can affect caspase and repair enzymes and cause sperm to die. It may affect calcium efflux. There's probably nothing more essential to cell life than calcium efflux. Divalent calcium cations are critical to the formation of a number of enzymes that affect whether or not cells live or die or repair. And without going into great details, this diagram from the Cleveland Clinic researchers suggests a number of paths that could be involved in the way that microwave radiation is affecting sperm in this case, but all membranes in general. Now, why don't you know more about this? Well, for one thing, it's very technical, and it's quite complicated. But as I said at the beginning, I figured if this was a problem, I'd know about it. After all, I was a scientist working with some of the smartest people in the world. The reason we don't know more about this is that there are very few studies that are really relevant. You'll hear occasionally, no longer by the way, from industry the assertion that we have 10,000 studies showing that cell phones are safe. You don't hear that anymore because you don't have 10,000 studies. We have almost no research underway in the United States except for one large animal study that was begun in 1999 and expects to be finished, I think now in 2015. That tells you a lot right there. We have in the United States not invested in training experts to understand this, or in the research that we need to understand the issue as well. So at this point, we're dealing with fewer than 1,000 studies that are experimental, or 1,000 studies on young animals, and this is according to the German government's website that covers all published literature in this field. Now, what about humans? I mean, after all, if cell phones really were a problem, wouldn't we all be keeling over from brain cancer? Well, I have to be fair. I am trained in toxicology and epidemiology, and in fact, most epidemiologic studies do not show any increase in brain cancer from cell phone radiation until at least 10 years of heavy use. Heavy use in the studies that find an effect is defined as half an hour a day. That was the definition of heavy use. Now, why don't we see an increase in brain tumors yet in the general population? Well, when the atom bombs dropped in Japan, they emitted ionizing radiation to an already weak and sickened population. And the survivors have been studied. And no increase was found in brain cancer in the survivors until 40 years later. We have radically changed our use of cell phones in the past 4 years. We've more than doubled our use of cell phones in the past 3 years. So if we see an increase after heavy use, and it takes 40 years, our grandchildren are going to be paying the price for what we've failed to do. Now, I want to share with you some countries where we have some data on head and brain tumors. The parotid gland is right here, okay? Right here. 1 in 5 parotid gland tumors in Israel is now occurring in someone under the age of 20. Here is the increase in the parotid gland tumor, and there's also submaxillary tumors. This is showing the parotid gland tumor has increased. The submaxillary tumors have not, submandible. And this work was published, and based on this, the Israeli Dental Association, hardly a radical fringe group, has urged young people to limit direct exposure of the head to microwave radiation from cell phones. How many of you had heard about the Israeli Dental Association warning? A case control study was published in 2007 when Israel was the world's #1 user of cell phones. By the way, the United States now is. And based on this study, the authors recommend continued research and suggest, in the language of science, an association between cellular phone use and parotid gland tumors. Now, in my book, The Secret History of the War on Cancer, I make clear that we waited too long to take action on tobacco and asbestos and vinyl chloride and a whole alphabet soup of toxic chemicals. We waited because we waited for the body count to be absolutely undeniable and irrefutable. I'm now a grandmother, and I don't want to see us wait any longer to try to protect our grandchildren. As a scientist, I understand the reluctance of my colleagues because the data are not conclusive yet, but they lead me and others to determine at this point that we know enough that we need to act now. And I want to show you some of the newer data. In 2013, Leonard Hardell of Örebro, Sweden, a really widely respected physician epidemiologist, confirmed the brain cancer risk is greatest for those who started to use cell phones before age 20. They have a 4 to 8-fold increased risk of malignant brain cancer within 10 years if they start to use a cell phone as teenagers. He's also just produced a report showing that people who they were able to study in Sweden who've used cell phones for 25 years, because they have data there, because they were some of the earliest adopters, have a 4-fold higher risk of tumors. And the longer they've used the phone, the greater the risk of the tumor on the hearing nerve, acoustic neuroma. This is a bar graph that we just produced this morning showing you, by the way, that the analog phones, those are those old shoe phones, you know, the big boxy phones, the people who use those phones have a 6-fold increased risk of a tumor on the hearing nerve. Now, these are not malignant tumors, but they can cause deafness, and paralysis of the face if they're not addressed. And the risk of the tumor is greatest for the longest-term users. And there is a risk with, it looks like a very unusual thing, that the newer phones, which emit less powerful radiation but have a more erratic signal, may have a greater risk. This is very important work. It should be a call for a national major research and training program, which I testified before the U.S. Senate for in 2009. I'm really glad to see all of you today because you're going to help not just be a part of my experiment, but a part of our demand that we invest as a country in the research and training that we need to answer these questions. Now, many of you may have heard that studies find no effect, and I want to just briefly discuss one major, widely publicized study that finds nothing. I want to make sure you understand. The Danish Cohort study, often trotted out, began with 700,000 users and then took out all of the business users. Why? Because they said we couldn't be sure that if a business was assigned the user, that the boss actually used the phone, maybe he shared it with everybody. I don't know about you. My father was a boss, and my father had one of the earliest cell phones, and he never shared it with anybody. He was so proud of that thing. It was like, and it was quite complicated to work. Nobody got to touch it. And it cost a lot of money. In 1980, I think it cost like $3,000 for the phone. And it cost maybe $500 a month to use it. But they threw out the business users, who were the heaviest users. They defined a user, and I'm not making this up, as someone who made one call a week for 6 months. It sounds like a really good Saturday Night Live routine, right? Colbert ought to make a lot out of that. They compared rates of brain cancer in those who used cell phones prior to 1995 with rates of brain cancer in all those who used cell phones afterwards, and I'm not making this up. In other words, they took people who used cell phones early on, when they didn't use them very much, when it cost a fortune to use them, and compared their rate of brain cancer with the rate of brain cancer in everybody else afterward that was assumed not to use a cell phone. And this is, in fact, the study that is usually cited as proof that cell phones are safe. Now, here's another piece of information from Denmark that just came out this week. And it's in Danish, but it comes from the State Institute in Denmark. And it shows a 40% increase in brain cancer in Denmark as of 2012. Here. To here. I don't know why there's such an increase in brain cancer. I think we need to find out. Here's similar data in Finland. Now, I want to caution you because cell phones are irrelevant to this increase. This could be due to industrial chemicals, better detection. This increase here, we don't know. Here's similar data in Norway. I don't think we should be in the business of waiting for dead bodies before acting to take prudent precautionary policies. And that's why it's very important that we work with physicians around the world, as we are, to issue this safety pamphlet, which, by the way, you can find on our website in 7 languages. It's been issued by the Turkish government as well as you can find it at Yale University in obstetrics and gynecology. But we have to understand that epidemiology, which studies patterns of disease in people, really only tells you about the past. It can't predict the future. And few studies have looked at long-term use, and very few studies have looked at children. So what are we doing? I want to conclude by showing you some very unusual cases which I think should be a real warning sign. We have reports of young women with breast cancer occurring extremely unusually. First of all, breast cancer usually occurs in women in their 50s. Of the cases I'm going to show you today, 2 of them are age 21. And all of the cases had tumors occurring exactly where the antennas of the cell phones were located, and they kept the phones in their bras. The FDA has an adverse events reporting program. We need to work with doctors around the world to report these cases. Not a single one has been reported yet to the FDA. I want to show you now a video of a brief video of what happened with these cases here in California. This report that you're about to see here won an Emmy. It won a national Emmy for investigative journalism. Right.
Could where you carry your cell phone make you sick? Some doctors say they're seeing evidence of cancer that could be linked to mobile phones. Tonight in our special report, KTVU Health and Science editor John Fowler on the alarm doctors are sounding.
It's convenient, say many young women.
It's probably the most convenient place to put it, especially when you go out. You know, you put your money on one breast and your phone on the other.
It's really easy to feel the vibration, so when somebody texts you and you can see the call really fast.
If I'm wearing a dress ever, I usually just slip it like in the straps or down in the center.
Maybe they should talk to Tiffany France.
I put my cell phone right in my bra.
Her mother had misgivings.
We never took it seriously until after she was diagnosed.
Tiffany got breast cancer at 21.
And it just so happened her tumors were exactly where her cell phone had been against her skin, her bare skin, for about 6 years.
No genetic or other risk factors. Surgeons removed Tiffany's left breast.
It's kind of coincidental that it is right where I kept my cell phone.
Coincidence? Donna Janes also got breast cancer at 39. Also, no risk factors. The dots here are where her tumors developed. Her doctor said it was an unusual distribution exactly matching her cell phone. This image shows the tumors were just under the surface of her skin.
All in this area right here, which is where I tucked my cell phone.
Jane said she did that for 10 years. She had a mastectomy.
Yeah, I thought cell phones were safe. I was under the impression that they were.
Breast surgeon Lisa Bailey told me cell phone-related breast cancer may be common, but doctors rarely ask about phones. I looked at this random case.
Would this be in the place where a cell phone would have been carried? On the outside?
Very likely, yes, if it was. I would never wear a cell phone immediately next to my body, and I would advise all women not to do that.
Never.
Dr. Bailey is the former president of the American Cancer Society of California, and I'm grateful that she's a colleague of mine. I want to show you something else now.
Go on the potty, and you can play with the iPad. As a mom, I know how difficult potty training can be. Guiding your child's interest and holding their attention long enough to train can be a big challenge. But it can be a little easier now with the brand new iPotty from CTA Digital for the iPad. This potty training seat features a special stand to securely hold the iPad, which kids already love, so they can play with apps, read books, or watch videos, all while potty training. There are even dozens of potty training apps available to help. The adjustable stand can be rotated 360 degrees to switch between horizontal and vertical views, and also includes a removable touchscreen cover to guard against messy accidents and smudges.
So you can protect the iPad from the baby. Right? And here's one more. Well, I know the first reaction is humor, but I think this is tragic. I think this is really tragic. As a public health expert, I am appalled. I'm absolutely appalled. Would we be giving these babies cigars or alcohol or cigarettes? These are devices that can be used by adults in our society. We know their brains are more than doubling in the first year of life. We know that there is a physiological effect that I've shown you today, but there are social and emotional effects. The bonding of the infant with the parent takes place in the first months of life. Are we really ready to give up that role to iPads and electronic devices? I think we really need a serious national conversation, and I'm delighted that the American Academy of Pediatrics is leading that conversation now. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to show you a lot more on the cell phone in the bra issue, but just move to this one image that you don't need to be a radiologist to appreciate. This is one of the 21-year-old women. That's metastatic disease. This is the antennas of the cell phone. These young women had no idea when they were sleeping with their phones tucked into their bras, starting at age 12 or 13, that it could possibly damage their health. They had no idea. And with your help, more young women will become aware of this. Pathology of the cell phone-related breast cancer. I'm working with a brilliant pathologist at the University of California, San Francisco. We want to collect the data in order to see if there's a particular type of pathological damage associated with cell phone radiation. There ought to be, again, a national program to gather this information, and there is not yet. The 5 cases we've identified have no inherited risk. One of them is Chinese American. That's the lowest risk group in the United States for breast cancer. All of them had tumors with unusual locations. Most breast cancer occurs in the upper outer quadrant, not in the center of the chest. And unfortunately, 2 of these young women have metastases. Now, I've shown you the fine print warning that's in your iPhone. They used to actually print the warnings out. Now it's buried in the phone. The BlackBerry had a warning that if you had a pacemaker in your chest, you had to keep it at least 7.8 inches, 20 centimeters away. Of course, your heart is your pacemaker, whether you have one implanted or not. And there's growing concern about young people with atrial fibrillation and other cardiac disorders, which remain unexplained. And there, again, this could be a factor. The unsafe toys that have been promoted, I don't think I need to add any more to that, except that when these children are using these devices, they have to be on airplane mode. They have to be on airplane mode, because otherwise they are sending and receiving microwave radiation. And this case for the iPhone, this plastic baby iPhone rattle case, I'm not making it up, says on the box, protect the phone from the baby. That's how these things are being marketed. Now, the American Academy of Pediatrics has recommended that children under age 2 have limited to no screen time. Most parents don't know that. And children love these devices. They love these devices because they really are very attractive and flashy and interesting. But a child needs to look you in the eye. It needs to feel you, smell you, and touch you to learn who you are and who she is. That's how children have always learned to become human, to become empathic, to be able to feel what other people feel. And if we give that up to these devices, we are creating a generation that may be at serious risk. Dr. Taylor advises that women not use cell phones near their abdomen, period, particularly if they're planning to have children. The South Koreans are ahead of us in many ways. They are much more digital than we. They have the highest rate of use of cell phones for the longest period of time. And South Korean neuropsychiatrists have diagnosed increasing cases of digital dementia in young children, characterized by incomplete brain development, with people who are early, heavy users of technology having improperly developed right hemispheres where empathy and judgment come into play. The prospects of our creating a generation of children that lack empathy is frightening. Worldwide phone advisories are being issued. I'm honored to work with the governor of Samsun province, Akskoy Hussein, who hosted me and members of Environmental Health Trust just this past year, and who is issuing our pamphlet in Turkish throughout the province. We're working in Belgium with the public health minister, where a law was passed to ban sales or advertising to young children of cell phones. Australia's Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency has created a fact sheet that gives people information about how to limit children's exposure to cell phones. The French Health Agency concluded in 2012 that there is evidence for biological effects both in animals and humans, and there has been an increased risk for tumors in some studies. They therefore recommended limiting exposure, particularly for children. Our government has not taken that position. But Toronto, Canada has taken steps at least to reduce Wi-Fi exposure, and my hometown of Jackson, Wyoming has issued a cell phone safety awareness declaration. Similar statements have been issued in Berkeley, Portland, Maine, and Portland, Oregon, Pembroke Pines, Florida, and I will work with any of you in any of your cities to see that the public becomes more aware of the need to practice safe phone. And I invite Dr. Clement and the Hippocrates Institute to partner with us on this effort, because if people already have cancer or chronic disease, then they must be extremely mindful of reducing their exposures to these devices. In San Francisco, the city attorney has called on the FCC to review the current standards, to reflect real uses now, reflecting the fact that the old standards were set 17 years ago when gas cost $1.25 a gallon and people were wearing leisure suits. The world is very different today. We have a campaign called Save the Girls, which promotes awareness of the fact that breast cancer can occur in young women who store cell phones in their bras. We're also launching a new program called Practice Safe Tech. We are providing cards that you can download from our website, and I'll have some cards available for you when I sign books after this talk now. The World Health Organization in 2011 concluded that cell phone radiation is a, quote, possible human carcinogen. I led a team of experts in 2013, 2 years later, that concluded that cell phone radiation is a probable human carcinogen. How much evidence do we need? What are we trying to give the message to our children and our grandchildren? Do we really want to wait, like we have done with tobacco and asbestos? Can we afford to do that? This technology has revolutionized the world. Business is booming in developing countries because of cell phones. I appreciate that there are really revolutionary components to cell phones. Our ability to respond to emergencies has been radically improved. But we've started to treat life like it's an emergency. You can do something really radical. You do not need to be interrupted 24/7. You can turn your phone off unless you really want to take a call. You can get used to putting your phone on airplane mode. The first time I did it, my daughter said, "Mom, what's the matter?" I said, "What's the problem, honey?" "Well, I was trying to reach you for a half hour." Well, I was in a yoga class and I thought I'd turn it off." "Well, you should have told me." I said, "Honey, we need to talk." In fact, you all need to talk with one another. Real talk. And we need to recapture our personal space and our private time. And some of the things that go with healing ourselves, requiring quiet and the ability to sit and think and pray and meditate. And you can't do that if you're waiting and the phone's going to ring or the beep's going to go off and you got to respond right away. So this is the advice that Environmental Health Trust, the World Health Organization, and others give, and it's summarized here on the back of this. Basically, distance is your friend. Use a speakerphone, use earpieces, do not keep the phone on in the body or pocket, and avoid using it in areas of weak signals. Protect the abdomens of pregnant women and adolescent men who wish to become fathers. If you want to be father of a healthy child, don't have a cell phone on in your pocket all the time. I'll leave you with this thought from Albert Einstein. The world is not dangerous because of those who do harm, but because of those who look at it without doing anything. And I'm hoping that that is changing with today. The number of people I have to thank who contributed to this talk is really quite long. And this list will be available with this talk, which will be available ultimately online. And it goes from Professor Taylor and Ashok Agarwal and Leonard Hardell, Joel Moskowitz at Berkeley, Lisa Bailey, and a host of others who have really allowed me to use the important information that they've generated from New Zealand to Japan to Korea, so that we all will learn how to work together to practice safe phone and make the world a safer place. You can follow us on social media. You're supposed to like us on Facebook. And that's a good example, right? How do I know if you really like me? But you might go to Facebook to give it a shot, please. And we have lots of information on YouTube. A lot more lectures are available as well. And we're always looking for suggestions about how to improve things. Environmental Health Trust is a nonprofit, and we are able to accept donations online as well. But at this point, what I'm really excited about is the idea of working with you, working with Hippocrates and others here, so that together we can make sure that our children do not have to go through the fate of these young women I showed you today with breast cancer, and that we can make the world safer for all of us. Thank you. Please come to the mic. Yes, sir.
On one of your slides said, I think Portland was restricting Wi-Fi in their parks. So you talked all about cell phones. What's your comments about Wi-Fi and also Bluetooth?
Okay. If the routers are located away from people, then for most people, Wi-Fi is not problematic. But there are growing reports of people who are quite sensitive to Wi-Fi. And for those people, the only comfortable exposure appears to be very little at all. And the science on the evidence from the environmental exposures is extremely weak, but that doesn't mean that it's safe. And I think we should learn something from that as well. Now, the City of Toronto has voted so far not to have wireless in all their parks. Many other cities have taken the opposite position. My concern is especially for children in schools. Wi-Fi routers in old buildings often, they're not like the little router you have in your home. If you have a router in your home, it should be located far away from where anyone sleeps or spends a lot of time. We have a Wi-Fi router. It's in a closet, in a floor where nobody is. And we turn it off at night if anybody is staying with us who has a problem with it. But the kind of Wi-Fi routers you have in old buildings, it's like industrial strength Wi-Fi. And if your child happens to be seated right next to it, it could be a big problem. And there's no rational policy for locating these routers. There needs to be a much more coherent policy about where routers are located, when they're on, how they're labeled, and what people know about them. Okay, thank you.
My question is, I've seen devices that you can put on your cell phone to protect it. Are those valid?
I know of no studies that show that those devices work. Now, it should not be my job to test them, should it? It's really not my job to do that. But I know of no studies that are independently done that show that they work. And the studies with the thermograms that show you the heat, it's not the heat that we need to be worried about. It's the pulsed digital signal.
Hi. What about the
the products like earthing and Q-Link that you're supposed to wear, or?
Right. I am not able to evaluate any of that. Earthing, which is something different. I mean, the idea that you feel better when you're connected to the earth, both spiritually and physically, I think we can't deny that, you know. It's kind of hard to do in Manhattan. Right? Right. And again, Q-Link, I have no data. I've never seen any independent data on any of that. Right? Right.
This is very interesting. Thank you. For guys, you know, they don't carry a pocketbook, so back pocket. I mean, is there any place safe on the body, or are you suggesting just really don't have it on if it's on your body at all?
Look, let's be realistic. These, you know, if you're working with these things, I think that we're going to see increasing examples. Men are going to start carrying MRSs, male purse, MRS. And using it in the outer pocket with winter clothes, it's a lot easier. Yeah. Summer clothes, and especially in the jogging shorts, forget it. You're really radiating the reproductive organs, male or female. So I think one of the issues here is that phones can be made safer. Look, we put airbags and seatbelts on cars. Remember, for years it said we're going to bankrupt the car industry if we required catalytic converters, if we required all these safety devices. The American public will never pay for it. We can't afford it. Remember that? Well, guess what? We figured out how to do it. Now, we still live in the greatest country in the world in many ways, and I know, hold patents on ways to make phones safer, with different antennas, different hardware, different software. Right now, the software of your phone is configured so that more than once a second, it's seeking a signal from a tower, wherever you are. You could change the hardware, you can change the software, you can change antennas so that they don't emit as much radiation and they still work. You have to site them differently. There's a whole bunch of things we can do. And that will only happen when people are more informed and organized to demand it. So there's a lot we can do. But for now, men should not be carrying phones directly on their body unless they're on airplane mode.
What's the difference between off and airplane mode?
Okay.
You mention airplane mode a lot.
Sure. Sure. You just told me something else I want to show you. Airplane mode means that the phone is still on, and it can more easily be turned on from that. And off means it takes a while to turn it on, okay? And here's a little commercial message I want to share with you, 15 seconds long.
Happy New Year!
Happy New Year! We want you to learn how to practice safe tech.
Practice safe tech.
Always remember, distance is your friend.
Distance is your friend.
And children should only use devices on airplane mode.
Airplane mode.
Happy New Year!
Happy New Year!
That's my grandson. Thank you.
What is the best type of headset that you might recommend? I saw you had like a regular telephone there.
Any headset's better than none, okay? Mm-hmm. This has the advantage that it's well insulated, the wire's thicker, so a thicker wire gives you more insulation. The worst thing to do is to have the phone in your pocket and then have it draped on your body here, because then you're getting the radiation in here that you would otherwise be getting here. The ideal headset would be an air tube with a ferrite bead on it. I have not found any. Ferrite just has a little metal that diffuses the signal a bit. But I've not found any that work really well. I have lots and lots of broken headsets, as I think most people do. But any headset is better than none. And a Bluetooth, I didn't answer that question before. Some people are sensitive to Bluetooth as well, but a Bluetooth does reduce the signal. The problem is people will have a Bluetooth here, and they'll keep the phone in the pocket. And that's not a good idea.
Thank you.
Right. There was a gentleman. Oh. Okay, thanks. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Most of the kids these days, they're texting rather than talking. So now with the kids, they have their phones pretty much with them all day.
Mm-hmm.
So what are we talking about? Do we have to keep them in their backpacks, not on their bodies at all? Is texting the same as having it up to your ear?
Okay. I had a long phone call from India a few days ago, and I've recently spoken to someone in Vancouver. The problems of texting are two separate things. The singer, children's advocate Rafi, is organizing against cyberbullying. There have been suicides in Canada, India, and the United States of young children who have been bullied by texting on phones. I mean, the reason The Lord of the Flies was such a powerful novel is that it reflected what will happen when young children can run amok without the normal controls that adults often provide them. What a cell phone does for a young child is give them a vehicle for relating to other children without the controls that parents traditionally can provide. So I'm very concerned about that component of texting in children, and young children in particular. I think we really are not fully aware of the extent to which you give your child a phone and allowing them to text, and you're opening them not only to predators, but to the bad behaviors and impulses that children have had throughout history, for which we've been able to say, stop, don't do that. Don't hit your brother. You can't, you have to learn, be nice, and be nice by example more so than don't do that. Be nice by positive example. Having said that, the physiological concerns about texting are these. A child keeping a phone close to their body for hours a day is exposing their reproductive organs to microwave radiation. Nobody can tell you the long-term effects of that. But the reproductive capacity of the animals that I showed you that were exposed, the mice and the rats, is something that we are evaluating now. And it certainly does not look like it's a good idea for young girls to be microwaving all of the eggs that they contain. Young women are born with all of the babies they can ever produce. Their oocytes are already programmed, and when those eggs form, you don't get a second chance. So my concern is both with the physiology as well as the psychology of these devices. And I'll be glad to answer your question afterwards, but I've been asked to stop at this time. I'll be happy to talk to you in the hall afterwards. Thank you all very much.